See who else pops in a little bit late today. Welcome to our Unit 11 live session, everybody. Good to see all of y'all. We're going to start our section on cognitive biases finally. We're kind of a week behind schedule on that, but it's my favorite part of the course. This turns a little bit into a psychology course over the next few weeks of the class. I'm greatly looking forward to it. Hope some of you psychology fans will also be into what we learned in class today. Let's do what we always do at the start of our live sessions, though. I'm going to pull up our Blackboard course page right here so we can look at what's happening in class this week. All right, so let's see. I'll go to course content. Last week you had to take that test. I haven't finished grading the tests yet. That's not going to happen probably until next week. But hopefully you at least got a snapshot of how you did on the first part of the test, because that you got instant feedback in terms of your grade. But since we're a week behind, I'm going to start with the Unit 10 folder just to let you know. In Unit 10 is one of the big readings we're going to be referencing a lot in class today. This excerpt from the book Thinking Fast and Slow by cognitive psychologist Daniel Kahneman. We'll be looking at this in a good amount of detail today. So just to give you a heads up on that. To go back to course content, now let's go into this week's folder, Unit 11. This is where you'll find the graded stuff for class this week. Scroll down, scroll down. All the slides we've got cooking for class this week are right here. The readings for class, 3 short ones, nothing particularly long. We've got one on change, 2 pages, very quick, very simple. We've got another one on memory. This one's a little bit longer, but still not too long, about 6 pages. And then we've got one called How to Lie with Statistics, a little bit on the longer side. It relates to the thing we'll be doing in the second part of class today, learning about mathematical biases. There's some cool optional resources for class this week as well. 2 videos, actually 3 videos, each of them pretty short, about 5 to 6 minutes long. Actually, the first one I think is 1.5 minutes. It's really short. They're all doing a good job of explaining or demonstrating some of the things we'll be learning in today's class. And then there's one of the better 2 episodes of a podcast out there that really does a good job of explaining the key insights about memory we're going to be learning in class today. All right, but who cares about all that? What you probably really care about is your assignment for class this week. You only have 1 assignment for class this week, and it's very straightforward and easy. It doesn't require a tremendous amount of thought. All I want you to do is participate in this coin flip activity and post your results in this week's discussion board. So what this coin flip activity asks you to do is first make up a random sequence of heads and tails without flipping a coin. And you can write that sequence down as a made-up sequence right here. Like I've got an example here. Maybe the first flip you flipped heads, second flip in your brain you flipped tails, then tails again, then heads, then tails again, then heads, then tails, then 3 heads in a row, etc., all the way down to the 20th one. That's the first one. You just make it up in your head. And then next, flip a coin 20 times. Actually do the coin flipping. I've got a coin right here, so I would do this, and I get tails, and then do it again, and I get tails again. So I'd write tails, tails, and I just keep doing it a total of 20 times, heads, and write down that sequence on the right side. And then what you'll do with this, if you scroll all the way down here, without letting any of us know which sequence is which, write down both sequences on this discussion board on Blackboard. I'll show you where you can go for this discussion board. I'll click on this. Here we go. And what I'm going to do after you have written down in your reply to my initial post here, I will guess which sequence came from your mind, the one you just made up in your mind, and which sequence came from actually flipping a coin 20 times. I'm a math magician. I'm remarkably good at this. I want you to try to fool me if you can, but if you can't fool me, I will show off my skills. And then the only other thing you have to do for your post is to offer some explanations, some hypotheses. Think abductively for how it is I'm doing what I'm doing. Am I actually a math magician? Am I able to read your mind? What am I looking for to try to figure out which was a coin flip and which one came from actually, which one came from your mind and which one came from actually flipping a coin? So I've given you an example of two of these sequences right here. I just did T for tails and H for heads. So here would be an example of one of the sequences. And here's the second sequence. One of these sequences I made up in my mind. Another sequence came from actually flipping a coin. Notice I didn't write which was which in my post. The job I would be doing in this circumstance would be coming along after your post and writing here, I think the second sequence came from your mind. And then I would just ask, am I right? And then you could come along and later verify that I'm right or verify that I got it wrong. Either way. That's all you have to do for class as an assignment this week. This will be due normal deadline on Wednesday by 11:59 p.m. It's not a discussion board where you have a bunch of posts. You only have to submit one post, and that single post is it. That's it. That's everything. It's a light week in terms of grading. It's not a test week. I'm trying to take it easy on y'all. Questions, thoughts, concerns about this assignment? Questions, thoughts, concerns about anything related to class today? Feel free to write nope in the chat if you don't have any questions. Feel free to write, yeah, I got questions in the chat if you do have questions. We got some no questions, all right. Some more no questions, good to hear, good to hear. All right. So 2 of you don't have questions. I guess that means we will get started with class. All right, so we're going to be talking about this, this reading. A reminder, this reading from Thinking Fast and Slow, you can find in Unit 10, right here in the Unit 10 folder. It's the only thing I asked you to read for class last week. We're finally getting around to actually discussing it. We're a little bit behind schedule. So we're going to be taking a look at this for a bit. And before we actually do some close reading of this, I want to just set the scene. We'll be talking about what are called cognitive biases. Now, cognitive bias is, generally speaking, a natural aspect of human minds that prevent us from reasoning perfectly. Some people refer to these cognitive biases as impediments to reasoning or roadblocks. They're these aspects of our mind that stop us, that hinder our ability to reason as effectively as we could naturally otherwise. And I want to emphasize the idea here of what it means when I say our minds. I'm talking about literally all of us, every single one of us in this class, myself included. Every single one of us counts as this sort of individual. And one of the interesting things about cognitive biases is that these sorts of biases emerge even in people who've done a lot of studying, even in super smart people, even in people who have studied this very topic of cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are these deep down ingrained aspects of our mental life. We'll be talking about some specific instances in a minute, but essentially when we're saying these things prevent us from reasoning perfectly, we're saying that these sorts of parts of our minds are the sorts of things that make us misinterpret the world, or the information we get about the world. I can't spell misinterpret. There it is. Misinterpret info we receive about the world. They also make us fall for bad arguments. They make us mistakenly think bad arguments are good arguments. Or they make us actually put forward bad arguments that we don't realize are bad. This is the key idea about a cognitive bias. And the word bias, as you normally hear it, you might hear of it in terms of a very specific type of mental bias. So you might think about like racial bias or gender bias or those sorts of things. And those are, in fact, a subset of cognitive biases. When somebody exhibits a racial bias, they might be biased against individuals of a particular race. When somebody's exhibiting gender bias, they might be exhibiting some sort of negative thoughts and attitudes and actions towards people of a particular gender. Those sorts of biases are real and they exist. They're just not the entirety of all cognitive biases. The cognitive biases we'll be studying in this class range from a whole host of things to the things we just see using our perception in the world in terms of our direct experience of the world. The things that we remember in terms of how good or bad our memory is. The things that we think about mathematically when we try to like figure out the odds or the probability of certain events. Any type of aspect of our mind related to overconfidence. Any aspect of our mind related to social biases that we might have as a pressure to believe what other people are believing because those other people believe it. These are all instances of cognitive biases, and only some of those types of cognitive biases relate to racial bias or gender bias or those other forms of prejudice or discrimination that gets closely associated with the word bias. Cognitive bias in this context is a just broader category that goes beyond those specifics. All right, so I want to now talk a little bit about why we might commit these sorts of biases, or why do we have. And I want to emphasize that it's literally all of us. Why do all of us humans have cognitive biases? Why don't we reason perfectly? I just like to fit everything on one line, so that's what I switched it to. Why do all humans have these biases? Why don't we reason perfectly? And we're going to consider a few answers to this, but the first answer is going to come to us from what it is where we were asked to read in class last time. So I'm going to switch over right now to that reading. I can do this. I know what I'm doing. I can do this. Have confidence in yourself. There we go. I did it. All right. So, but I'm in the wrong one. Did I do it? Which one am I sharing? I did the wrong one. Give me 1 second. I'll switch back to this one. This is one I can actually write on and stuff. I could highlight stuff. I like highlighting stuff. I'm a sucker for highlighting. All right, so let's just first take a look at this image. Quickly describe what you see in this image right here. in the chat or raise your hand. Describe what it is you're looking at in this photo. I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can see it right there. What do you see when you see this photo? Not the best photo. It's clearly been photocopied. What are you looking at? What do you see? This isn't a trick question. So Facundo says a woman in shock. Isabel says a person. Yeah, feel free to be as specific as you want in this circumstance. I like a woman in shock. That's nice and specific. Yeah. Najwa says, she's in my, you're really accusing of doing it, right? It does feel like she's about to accuse me of something, right? Ashley says it's someone who just lost an argument or an angry woman. Yeah, that's the face that she's giving Najwa. You're really accusing me of doing it face? How dare you accuse me, right? Yeah, she's totally seeming angry. I like this. This is a very natural, easy interpretation of what's going on here. Let's see what Daniel Kahneman writes about this. Your experience as you look at this woman's face seamlessly combines what we normally call seeing and intuitive thinking. So we're going to emphasize this idea of the intuitive aspects of what it is you just did. As surely and quickly as you saw that the young woman's hair is dark, you knew she's angry. Think about how quick it was for you to realize that this is a woman who's angry. This woman seems upset in some particular way. Furthermore, what you saw extended into the future. You sense that this woman is about to say some very unkind words, probably in a loud, maybe strident voice. A premonition of what she was going to do next came to mind automatically and effortlessly. You didn't intend to assess her mood or to anticipate what she might do. Your reaction to this picture did not have the feel of something you did. It just happened to you. This was an instance of fast thinking. Fast thinking is the key bit behind all of this. So I'm going to be switching back and forth a lot today between some notes we're going to look at and this article, because I think this is an important article to just take a look at. I guess that's not an article, it's an excerpt from a longer book. But the things that I've been highlighting here are these words like intuitive, automatic, effortless, unintentional, involuntary, it just happened to you. All of this falls under the part of our processing, our mental processing that we refer to as fast processing. It didn't require a lot of effort to do what it is you're doing when you were looking at this particular thing. It didn't require a lot of cognitive effort. You could just see right away. And I particularly like Najwa's looking into the future and say, like, I can tell she's about to say something like, you're really accusing me of doing it? She's got that face where she's about to say something like that. That feels like automatic and intuitive in this particular way. Now I want you all to think a little bit about this problem. 17 times 24. What do you think? What is 17 times 24? What does 17 times 24 equal? Anyone trying to do it? Shantae's got 408, Shanae's got 408. Did you all try to do it in your head, or did you go for your computer, or your calculators? Shantae, did you go for a calculator? Shantae went to Siri. Shanae did both. Oh, that's interesting. So let me give you another one, and don't use a calculator, don't use Siri. Just try this one on for size. What's 16 times 15? Don't use a calculator. Don't use your computer. Don't use Siri. Shay's going with 240. I guess I got to do it myself. We got another vote for 240. Facundo's going with 130. Interesting. It's a pretty sizable difference. We got 3 votes for 240. I'm feeling a little confident that it might be 240. Facundo's going with never mind. He's feeling a little bit of the anxiety around this. Don't worry. There's no prize for this. There's no shame for getting it right or wrong. It's totally okay. I just want you to feel the process. What's going on in your mind when you're doing this? Let's hear Daniel Kahneman's description of this. You certainly knew immediately that this was a multiplication problem, and you probably knew you could solve this with paper and pencil, if not without. Did any of you actually write on a piece of paper to try to get the answer to this? Or did some of you do it in your head? All right, Sinead and Shantae, you did it in a piece of paper. Okay, very cool. Facundo did it in his head. Okay. Olivia did it in her head. Okay, cool. You had some vague intuitive knowledge of the range of possible answers, right? You might think that 12,000 is too big an answer for this one, and 123 is probably too small an answer for this one. But until you really looked into it without spending time on the problem, you wouldn't be certain that the answer is not 568. That feels like before you look it up, before you sit down with a pencil and paper, that could be the answer. In this case, it's not actually. A precise solution did not come to mind immediately. You felt that you could choose whether or not to engage in the computation. And now you all actually did this. What you did when you tried to do that math problem, in particular our new math problem was 15 times 16, is you experienced slow thinking. You first retrieved from memory a cognitive program for multiplication that you learned back in school. Then you implemented it. Carrying out this computation was a strain. It required a lot of mental effort. You felt the burden of holding a lot of material in your memory, and you needed to keep track of where you were and where you were going while holding on to an intermediate result. The process was mental work. It was deliberate. You had to be slow and careful. It was effortful. It took effort. It was orderly. You had to keep it organized. These are all prototypes of slow thinking. The computation was not only an event in your mind, your body was also involved. Maybe for some of you, your muscles tensed up, or your blood pressure rose. Maybe your heart rate increased. I don't know. Someone looking closely at your eyes while you tackled this problem might have found that your pupils dilated. Your pupils contracted back to normal size as soon as you ended your work when you found the answer. The answer to 17 times 24 is in fact 408, that many of you got. Or maybe when you just gave up and decided not to answer it. And I do think the correct answer, I haven't verified myself, but in my head, I tried to do 15 times 16 and I got 240. For some weird reason, I remember that 15 times 15 is 225. 15 squared is 225. And so you just add one more 15 to that to get 240. But yeah, good. This whole system that we've just described here is slow processing. Up here, fast processing. Down here, slow processing. There's some key differences in both of these. So I'm going to switch over right now to our notes, my little, what do you call this? Word document. And I got to discuss fast mental processing and slow mental processing. I promise, by the way, we are going to answer this. We'll come back to this, The question that started this was, why do we have these sorts of biases? Well, fast and slow mental processing, fast and slow thinking might have something to do with this. So let's take a look at some of the key differences. So fast mental processing seems to be automatic processing. It seems to be intuitive. Seems to be the sort of thing that is involuntary. It just happens to you. You don't have to put much effort into it. It's super quick. It's effortless. It just happens. It's more of a reaction than an action that you take that's deliberate. Slow processing, on the other hand, is not automatic at all. It's effortful. It requires a lot of painstaking, deliberate process. So it requires some sort of choice. It's deliberate. Rather than intuitive, it requires mental effort. Rather than being involuntary, you can choose to engage in it. Rather than being quick, it's slow. Rather than being effortless, it requires a lot of effort. It's effortful. It's a strain or straining. And rather than being reactive, it seems to be that you're actively engaged in it. And this seems to be particularly deliberate and conscious. You can feel yourself doing the mental processing on the slow side of this. On the fast side, it just seems too quick for you to even notice that it happened. All right, so let's go back to our article for a second to see other examples of what's going on here. Too many things open. All right, so scrolling to the second page here, we've got our two systems right here. System 1, that's what we're going to refer to as our fast mental processing or our fast thinking. I call these a few different words, fast thinking, fast mental processing. Sometimes I'll just refer to this as our fast brain. All of this system 1 is about the fast stuff. Automatic, quick thinking, little to no effort, no sense of voluntary control. System 2, on the other hand, that's where we're dealing with slow thinking. Another word for slow thinking, slow mental processing, or your slow brain. Neither of these is taken to be either an insult or a positive. We don't think of fast brain as better and slow brain as worse. They're just two aspects of our human psychology. And in system 2, down here, our concern is that our processing is more about allocating attention deliberately to effortful mental activities that demand it, like complex computations. The operations of system 2 are often associated with the subjective experiences of agency and choice. I'm trying to highlight this thing, agency. That's too close. It's making a choice. Concentration, effortful, complex. These are all the words around system 2. Whereas system 1, it's happening again in the reverse side. System 1 is more automatic, quick, little to no effort, involuntary in this sort of way. So let's do some examples of stuff on the system 1 side of things. This is the fast thinking side of things right now. Everything that's fast thinking are examples right here. Detecting that one object is more distant than another object, right? It's pretty easy for you to notice just looking around your room, which objects are close to you, which objects are further away. Those require a lot of thought to do that. That's your fast brain. So just to be clear, let's put this title at the top here. All of this is fast mental processing, which I couldn't spell correctly. Let me try again. Still couldn't spell it correctly. There we go. All of this fast mental processing right here, orienting to the source of a sudden sound. Let's say you just hear a crash. For some reason, you just intuitively know, for most of us, where that crash came from, which side, to your left, to your right, behind you, in front of you. Most of you will be able to finish this phrase pretty quickly. Bread and blank. What follows bread and? What's the next word in bread and what? Yeah, David went with butter. Is that the thing that automatically a bunch of y'all thought as well? Leah did the same thing. Yeah, that's such a popular pairing. Bread and butter is something that I've heard so many times in my life growing up that that's an automatic association I make in my mind. Making a disgust face when you're shown a horrible picture, absolutely fast processing. Detecting hostility in someone's voice. You don't have to put a lot of effort in that for most of us to notice when somebody's tone has shifted to a little bit of anger and hostility. Notice simple computations are automatic to us. 2 + 2 = 4 comes very naturally to all of us, very intuitively. Complex math is a little bit more on the slow processing side. Reading words on a large billboard, by the time you're literate, you're able to read. Reading doesn't take a lot of effort, at least just a single word on a billboard. Driving a car on an empty road, this one's kind of freaky. Have you ever noticed yourself just tuning out while driving? For those of you who have driven a bunch, I've driven a lot in my life. I used to deliver pizza, so I've driven all the time. And there's definitely been times where I've zoned out and 5 minutes have gone by, and all of a sudden I just sort of snap out of it and I'm like, whoa, I didn't even notice, but I took all the correct turns I had to take on my commute to work. I was able to totally zone out and just automatically go through the motions of driving a car. Has that happened to any of y'all? David says, there are times where I get to where I'm going and can't even remember the drive. Yeah, right? Especially a drive you've done a bunch of times before already. That's something you can do without thinking. Isabel, I definitely have that feeling where I'm like, wait, how did I get here? Did that even happen? Yeah. The sad times for me are the times where I'm going one place and I just automatically start the drive going to a different place without even realizing, like, oh, I don't have to go to work today. Why did I start driving to work? That sort of automatic just habit takes over. Yeah, Isabel, you don't even remember if you saw any red lights? Yeah, that's so scary, right? But there's somehow in your fast mental processing, you automatically did probably notice them, but you didn't take them in as significant events in your memory. Really creepy. Here's an interesting example. If you are a really good chess player, like at the level of mastery of something, finding a strong move in chess is really easy for you. It probably is automatic to you at this point. It doesn't require much mental effort at all. Most of us, myself included, it requires a ton of mental effort. But the more you master a subject, the more automatic that subject gets. Think about stuff that you've basically mastered at this point. I used to play the piano a bunch growing up, and there were some songs on the piano I could play that looked pretty darn impressive, that were just automatic to me. It was just pure muscle memory. I didn't have to think. In fact, I would turn my brain off, and that would help me because I could just automatically do it without thinking. Any of you have examples of this? Oh, Olivia used to drive to your old job. Yeah, that's definitely something that's happened to me. So I totally get that. Anyone have examples of stuff you are particularly good at that feels almost automatic to you these days? Like playing a musical instrument or I don't know, maybe chess is the example for you. Annoying my friends. I love it, Najwa. Yeah, is it swimming, right? It could be muscle memory for you at this point. It's a good example. Yep. They often say in competition that in like high level athletics, sports competition, the best thing you can do while you're in a game, a competitive game, is turn your brain off in some sense. Is not overthink things and to just let your automatic reflexes that you've trained years and years to hone, to really develop. You just let those reflexes take over and you switch to this automatic fast brain processing. Yeah, apt description. All right. So other examples here, understanding simple sentences, recognizing that meek and tidy soul with a passion for detail resembles an occupational stereotype. You might be able to see that with ease. Excellent. So here's something that some of you might be familiar with. This drawing right here of these two lines. Which line do you think is longer? Which line looks longer to you, the top line or the bottom line of these two? Does the top line look longer or does the bottom line look longer? Lydia says the bottom line looks longer. Facundo says the bottom, although, spoiler alert, they are the same size. So that's what makes this an illusion. Facundo's exactly right. These are literally the same size. They're the same length as each other. But you know what our fast mental processing does? Our fast mental processing automatically, reflexively, intuitively interprets these two lines such that the bottom line is longer and the top line is shorter. For some reason, if we have arrows where the little arrows on the outside are facing away from the line looks shorter. And if we have arrows facing toward the line seems longer for many of us. Any of you who have grown up in a society where there are lots of 90-degree angles will naturally interpret lines in this way. Weird and automatic. This is a classic clash between our fast mental processing that's sort of telling us one answer and our slow mental processing, where if we sat there and were deliberate about it, the way Facundo was just describing, we could measure and see that these are the same exact length. Not sure what I could do. Maybe I'll make it a lot bigger here, and maybe we can just see that they are, in fact, exactly the same length. So let's see here. Try exactly stopping here. And then try the same thing. Didn't exactly work out. Okay, close, pretty close. Can you see how these are essentially the same length as each other? I didn't mean to split that one up. I don't know if I've done a great job of visualizing this. Anyway. All right, so those are good examples of fast mental processing. Now let's skip to the next page and look at some examples of slow mental processing. The effortful, deliberate, slow mental processing is stuff like this. Bracing for the starter's gun in a race. If you've ever ran a race, you're focused exactly on that one sound that means you can go, that you can start running. Focusing your attention on just the clowns in a circus, not everything else, not the lions and the lion tamers or the acrobats or anyone in the crowd or your friends or your parents. Focusing just on the clowns takes some mental effort. Focusing on the voice of a particular person in a crowded, noisy room. Maybe you haven't experienced this one lately because of COVID restrictions, but when you're at a party and there are a bunch of people talking and you just want to listen to one person talking in that noisy room, it takes a lot of your mental effort. It's deliberate in this way. Trying to find a woman in a crowd of people that has white hair, just looking for that one particular woman with white hair. Searching your memory to identify a surprising sound that sort of sounds familiar. You're like, wait, where have I heard that sound before? That takes effort. Maintaining a faster walking speed than's natural for you. You try to keep up with maybe one of your friends who's just a naturally faster walker than you. Might require more mental effort. Usually walking for most of us doesn't require much mental effort at all. Monitoring the appropriateness of your behavior in a social situation. If you're concerned about whether what you're doing is acceptable or appropriate or not. Counting the occurrences of the letter A in a page of text. Just think about this right now. In this one line, count the number of A's. Just this top line right here. I'm going to try to do it myself. Oof, that took me like 7 seconds. I think I have an answer. How many A's are just in that one line? Olivia's got 3. Anaya's got 3. I think I spotted 3 as well. Let's see here. I got this A, and this A. Are there any others? I think it was just those 3 in that one. All right, cool. That requires a lot of effort, though. That's not something that just intuitively happens to you. Telling someone your phone number, that might require some mental effort. Parking in a narrow space. That's provided that you're not like one of those super awesome garage attendants who's constantly parking cars in narrow spaces and does it so much that it becomes second nature, that it's just automatic and intuitive to you. For most of us who don't have to often park in narrow spaces, it requires mental effort. I know whenever I parallel park, I literally stick my tongue out like I'm Michael Jordan, like I'm trying extra hard to parallel park. Filling out a tax form, checking the validity of a complex logical argument. What is this, a critical thinking class all of a sudden? So these are all examples of slow mental processing. So here's what I want you all to do right now. I want you all to come up with examples of both of these kinds of processing right now. And I'm going to give you all some time to do this. So let's start just with fast mental processing. Everybody come up with at least one example and share it either by hitting that raise hand button and unmuting yourself and saying your example of fast mental processing, or just write in the chat your example of fast mental processing. Give me all your examples right now that you can think of, not ones that already are listed here, but give me some other instances of a mental process you could do that uses your fast brain. That's fast thinking in action. Who's got an example? Olivia says making a grilled cheese. Okay, sounds like you've made it a bunch. Some people, that might not be fast mental processing for them if they've not made grilled cheeses that often. But let's say you've made grilled cheeses dozens of times in your life. You don't even have to think about it, right? You just take the bread without thinking, you slap some cheese on it, you grill it on a pan, right? You grease up the pan real quick. You just flip it, flip it. Isabel, writing your name is a great example. I like that one. It doesn't require any effort at all for me to write my name these days. By the way, it did require me some effort when I changed my name. My name used to be Sean Landis without the Keegan. And then I got married and suddenly I had to write Sean Keegan-Landis. And that required more effort. So much effort that I even misspelled Keegan. I didn't put the capital K in it right now. But it's been a bunch of years since I've been married for 4 years. So now writing my name is intuitive again. Writing Sean Keegan-Landis is intuitive. I love Olivia's example, washing our hands. Did any of you go through that experience right at the beginning of COVID where you realized like, oh wait, aren't we supposed to be washing our hands for like 30 seconds? And then suddenly washing your hands, an activity you've done all your life that was automatic and intuitive, suddenly washing your hands took some mental effort. Any of you have a song that you would sing to yourself while washing your hands to play so that you could make it to that 30 seconds? That was a definite meme that went around where people were like, well, what you want to do is sing the happy birthday song twice while you're washing your hands. And you want to make sure not only do you wash your hands this way, but you get between your fingers and you go like this as well. And you get the outside and then you do it all over again. And then you finally rinse. That was especially wash your hands hard. Opening doors, Shanae, I love that example. That's absolutely fast mental processing. Unless it's a door you've never seen before, most doors are pretty simple, right? There's either a handle that you just, pull on, or there's something you push on, or there's a knob that you twist and push or pull. Very automatic, very intuitive. Shantae, checking social media. Yeah, I know that I have some automatic processes. Whenever I'm driving and my phone is sort of like mounted to my dashboard, whenever I go to a stoplight, without even thinking, I just flip my phone to sort of check my mail or check Facebook or check something, because I'm just like, well, I'm at a stoplight. I should check something on my phone. That's automatic to me these days. Eating food, Facundo. Yeah, it doesn't require a lot of mental effort for me to eat most of the food that I eat. Sometimes if it's a rare new food I haven't eaten before, it might take me some time to be like, wait, how do I cut into this? What size bite am I looking for? But for most of the food I eat, I've eaten it dozens of times before, doesn't require mental effort at all. Olivia says regarding opening doors, whether the pull or push is your hardest challenge. Honestly, Olivia, there are some doors that are really poorly designed. There are some doors that have a handle on it, where it would make sense if you have a handle that you would pull on the handle to open it, that are actually push doors. That's a poorly designed door. When you see a handle, it's indicating to you, pull. But if it's a push door, you shouldn't have a handle on it. That's frustrating. That's silly. So we got to design doors better. Anyway, that's my dumb rant for the day. All right, excellent examples, everybody, of fast mental processing. Now let's take a look on the other, slow mental processing. I want your examples of slow mental processing right now. Anything that requires a lot of effort, a lot of heavy lifting mentally. So taking notes, Olivia, that's a good example, right? Unless you're something like a trained court stenographer, right? I don't know if anybody's ever met a stenographer, somebody who's able to literally listen to people talking and just write down verbatim in that particular stenography language what's being said. It's automatic to those people. For most of us who aren't at that level, taking notes is absolutely slow mental processing. Facundo, really good, ripped from the headlines example, taking a critical thinking exam. I would hope that that involved some slow mental processing. I was trying to get you to think slowly, to think deliberately, not in an effortless way, in an effortful way. Studying for sure, Shantae, right? You're absolutely focusing your mental efforts on trying to understand material. But yeah, also Olivia, fast enough to actually finish the test, right? So yeah, there is this balance for sure. Other examples of slow mental processing y'all can think of? Actually answering this question. Way to get meta, Isabel. I like that. Right. You have to rack your brain and be like, well, what's an example of slow mental processing? Huh. What is that? Interesting. Yeah, really good examples all. So I love every example that y'all are giving. And one of the things I want to say about this, if I can go back to our notes, where are they? There it is. Fast mental processing is absolutely magical. It is wonderful and amazing. But because of how automatic, intuitive, involuntary, quick, effortless it is, sometimes it can also be a bit sloppy. Sometimes a little bit of sloppiness comes along with this. Sometimes what we do with our fast mental processing is not come up with the most accurate answer. We come up with an answer that's like good enough or approximate or not exactly right, but somewhat in the ballpark. There's a sort of sloppiness to fast mental processing. And a lot of our mental processing is fast mental processing. This fast mental processing is basically efficient. It's trying to save mental energy. That's what I mean by efficient. This fast mental processing saves us some mental energy. And this, by and large, is pretty decent, but it can lead to these biases we're discussing at the start of class today, these sorts of cognitive biases. So one reason we don't reason perfectly is because our minds aren't infinite. Our minds look for ways to save mental energy. And so this involves taking shortcuts. A mental shortcut is what we think what people refer to as a heuristic. I'm not sure if you've heard the word mental shortcut, heard the word heuristic before, but basically it's a heuristic is a mental shortcut. Some sort of thing you do that works a lot of the time, like a rough rule of thumb, but isn't always perfect. So one reason we might have these sorts of shortcuts is just to save mental energy. That's one big reason why we do this. So a lot of our cognitive biases are going to fall on the fast mental processing side of this balance. It's not that we're perfect with slow mental processing, but we are more reliable and more accurate when we slow down and carefully consider stuff. When we're on the fast side, we're getting answers almost given to us. They're not stuff we try to answer. They're just answers that appear to us. And these work a lot, but they sometimes mess up. So these shortcuts often work, but sometimes mess up. And when they mess up, it's when we're committing these biases. When they sometimes mess up, those are the examples of our biases. So let me give you an actual real example of this right now. I'm going to pull up a video. I've got to get to the video itself. This is a video of a bunch of pitchers in baseball pitching a particular type of pitch called a knuckleball pitch. I don't know how many of you are familiar with knuckleball pitches. Hopefully you can watch all of this. Let me try this again so you can actually start seeing this. When a knuckleball pitcher pitches, a knuckleball pitcher is relying on a batter's mental shortcut not working for them. A heuristic that we all use to find a ball, to try to catch a ball, to try to hit a ball, is being exploited in this circumstance. Here's what a knuckleball looks like. When a knuckleball pitch is thrown correctly, the ball, when it's thrown, doesn't spin at all. I'm not sure if you're able to see that in that particular video. I'll go back for a second to just that one part here. The ball isn't really spinning at all. Here it is again. That normally a ball spins a lot. And weirdly enough, without you realizing it, subconsciously, unconsciously, absolutely intuitively, we expect balls that are moving towards us or away from us to be spinning while they're moving towards us or away from us. When a ball doesn't spin, it weirdly doesn't even look like it's moving towards us. When a ball is thrown to us with no spin whatsoever, it looks like this weird, here's a great example, that. Did you see that ball not spinning at all? Look at that, it's not spinning. They do such a good job of fooling people that even the catchers are fooled. Look at how many times the catcher doesn't even catch the ball when it's thrown. Well, these catchers are now doing a good job. But up over here, look at all these examples where the catcher doesn't even catch the ball because the catcher, whose job it is to catch the ball, is so confused as to where the knuckleball pitch is. This is a perfect example of a cognitive in action. Oh, right, yeah, I would play it at half speed. Thank you for the recommendation, Facundo. But a knuckleball pitch is a perfect classic example of a cognitive bias in action. Most of the time, catching a baseball is automatic, effortless, intuitive. For people who have been playing baseball all their life, they can just totally do that without thinking. But because we're using a mental shortcut whenever we're trying to catch a baseball, whenever any of us are trying to catch any ball, honestly, that mental shortcut can be exploited. And if you throw a ball in such a way that it violates the heuristic that we're using, it's going to lead those of us trying to catch the ball to make a mistake, to misjudge what's going on. So back to our notes. Our example of sometimes messing up right here. Catching a knuckleball pitch would be an example of this. So a lot of what we're going to see when we discuss all of these cognitive biases throughout the next few weeks of class are ways in which our mind just saves energy, is trying to save energy, is trying to be lazy. Another way of thinking about fast mental processing is that it's this sloppy and efficient thing, but it's also just plain old lazy. Lazy isn't always bad. I think of lazy and efficient as two sides of the same coin, right? Our brain can't constantly be processing all of the information we're taking in around us. There's too much information around here, right? If I were processing all the information, I would be looking at exactly what year this nickel was. And I would be looking at exactly what's written on this nickel. Does it say "In God We Trust"? I think it does. Yep. And I would be looking at the back and reading it and trying to memorize exactly how many columns are on this particular building depicted on the back of this nickel. There's so much information in just a single small coin. We don't take in all of that. We do stuff that's just good enough. Shortcuts that are good enough, that often work, that often get the job done, but don't always. And cognitive biases are the moments where minds aren't good enough to get the job done. So that's definitely one thing that causes us to commit these sorts of biases. There are these other things, so I don't want you to assume that it's just that one and only one thing. Other reasons why we don't reason perfectly, why we have biases, is that our minds don't just reason. Our minds have other jobs. The other jobs of a mind would be to do stuff like take care of our mental health. And to the extent that our minds care about our happiness, our well-being, our minds might actually trick us into reasoning imperfectly. There are some things that people refer to as an optimism bias. That people who on average feel happier, feel more optimistic, might have a less realistic view of the world. And we'll be discussing some of these. But that's a whole other side of our mind. Our mind doesn't just care about making sure we're reasoning perfectly, making sure we're understanding and correctly interpreting the world around us perfectly. Our minds also care about our mental health and well-being. And to the extent that our minds have to focus on our mental health and well-being, it might come at the expense of our ability to reason. Another thing our minds seem to care about is maintaining social relationships. Humans are pretty naturally social beings. And our mind has to make sure we get along with people. Maybe not literally everybody, but some people. Our friends, maybe our family. People who we think of as members of our in-group. And so we might have social biases as a result of this. So we'll be discussing each and every one of these reasons in much greater detail throughout the next few weeks. But this fast mental processing and slow mental processing is a good first approximation of why these biases emerge. There's a whole automatic side of our brain that gives us answers, often really well. I don't want to downplay how effective fast mental processing is. But sometimes it messes up because it's sloppy. It's efficient, aka lazy. All right, I want to show off another video right now. Let's see if I can switch to it. That highlights another way in which our mind has a heuristic. This is going to be a cool card trick we're going to try to watch right now. Let's see if I can make it full screen. All right, so I'm going to pause this right now before the big reveal. This video has nothing to do with the actual card trick, which I don't think is that impressive. This video was mostly about something else. Anybody notice anything weird that happened in this video? Anything unusual, anything odd? Feel free to write no in the chat. You're like, I don't know, it was a card trick. I didn't see anything else that weird. If your answer is no, just write no in the chat. But if you did notice anything weird, let us know. Did any of you notice anything weird? Can you verify that you can hear me? I muted my mic so you could try to listen to that.
Professor, I was not able to hear the video.
So listening to the person talking isn't that important. It doesn't matter what the person's saying. Basically, there was a card trick happening. And the card trick involved switching the deck of cards so that all the cards at first had a red backs, and then at the end, the cards had blue backs. But that really doesn't matter. So let's show off what's supposed to be kind of weird and funky about this. There were 4 changes in this video. Did anybody notice anything that changed from the start of this video to the end of this video? So Olivia's going with no. Thank you for at least saying no. I appreciate it. Let's show what happens here. The guy's wearing a tan shirt. The woman's wearing a black shirt. The background behind them is black, and the tablecloth in front of them is black. Look what happens by the end of the video. Suddenly, the guy is wearing a black shirt. The woman's wearing a green shirt. The background behind them is red, and the tablecloth in front of them is tan. Did any of you notice any of those changes? They all happened. Weird, right? Let's watch the video from a different angle right now. So you see, he's got a tan shirt on right now. She's got a black shirt on. But now that they're zooming in a little bit, watch what happens. Quickly puts on his black shirt. Now it's her turn to put on a green sweater. There goes the tablecloth changing. Let's see the final change to the background. Boom. All right. So this is a phenomenon people refer to as inattentional blindness. Another word for this is change blindness. Psychologists suggest that we don't perceive large changes in our environment. There could be very big changes in what's going on around us, and we might not even notice this, particularly if we're focused, if our attention is focused on one thing. Maybe your attention was focused on the cards, or maybe reading the captions because you couldn't hear what was going on. When your attention is focused that way, you might not notice super large changes in your environment. Changes as big as, that dude's wearing a different color shirt. Changes as big as, wait, wasn't the background black? Now it's red? Our minds literally don't notice these things. We don't pick them up. Some of us might notice these some of the times, but most of us don't notice most of these large changes, according to psychological studies. And by the way, quick follow-up, when I played the second half of this video, how many of you noticed the gorilla in the video? How many of you noticed that there was a gorilla hanging out in the video the second time you watched it? Any of you noticed the gorilla? Amanda noticed the gorilla. Facundo did, Leah did, Olivia. All right, at least some of you did. I would like any of you to be honest and be like, what are you talking about? What gorilla? What do you mean? Any of you not notice it? I'll go back just to remind you. Look at that, right behind the video person, just to the right of the person making the video, is just a random person in a gorilla costume. That's a shout out to one of the classic studies on attentional blindness. The first big study on inattentional blindness asked participants in the study to watch a video where a bunch of people were passing a basketball around, and the subjects had to count how many times the people threw a bounce pass as opposed to a regular chest pass. And then in the middle of that video, while they were throwing around the ball, somebody in a gorilla costume walked into the middle of the video, paused at the middle of the screen, pounded their chest a little bit, and then continued walking out of screen. Most people who were subjects in the video just trying to count the basketball bounces didn't notice the gorilla. Yeah, so I didn't show that one because I feel like a bunch of you might have seen that one already. Onel's seen it, Shantae's seen it. That's just a classic shout out to this. So, attentional blindness is hard. Attentional blindness is tricky. It suggests there's something weird about our minds where we're not really perceiving all the information in our environment as much as we think. So let me do another example of this real quick. This is another example where the audio doesn't matter. What matters is what's going on in this video. So I'll make this a little bit bigger. I know you can't hear this, I apologize. But essentially there's a guy looking for directions, finds a stranger and asks him for directions. But then a door goes between them. A different person emerges from behind that painting. The stranger doesn't notice at all. That stranger doesn't realize he's talking to a completely different person. And it's not just that one stranger. Here's a second instance of it happening. Some of you might have seen this before, I'm not sure. We're talking about literally changing the person. Completely different person that you're talking to. And most people don't notice it. About 75% of people in psychological studies fail to notice these differences. So now we're going to switch it from our normal first person to a completely bald second person. See if this person notices. This new person's now completely bald. The woman doesn't notice it at all, doesn't pick it up whatsoever. "75% of people who participate in studies like this don't notice that they're talking to a literally different person. Yeah, a drive-through is a good example of this, Amanda. By the way, this is one person in this TV show who does notice. Look at him being like, wait, what? And he literally just said, I could have sworn there was another guy I was talking to. But he keeps giving directions anyway, but he's one of the people who actually noticed the switch. All right. I'll end the video there. This is another extreme example of attentional blindness. To suggest The larger point in terms of cognitive biases, we're just not taking in as much information as we think we are. The way that our perception works, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our mouth, our hands to feel stuff, it's not nearly as comprehensive as we think it is. Our senses are giving us the illusion that we're taking in our entire surroundings. But in fact, we're only taking in the bare minimum amount of information we need to get the gist of what's going on around us. And because most of the time our environments don't radically change around us, walls don't change color around us, people's shirts don't change color around us, we don't even notice what the color of somebody's shirt is, what the color of the wall is. We don't register those things in us because we can always just check right away. So our mind, just as part of its efficiency, as part of its laziness, doesn't maintain that in their mind, doesn't maintain that as part of their records. Amanda's got a good example in the chat. There were a couple of videos on YouTube where people did this at a drive-through and switched people. Yeah, and you would expect drive-through people to be exactly in the state as that person being asked directions. You're dealing with strangers most of the time. You might not notice that sort of switch. So I got a question for you all. Does anyone know the color of the shirt I was wearing at the start of the live session today? What color shirt was I wearing at the start? Okay, so a few of you noticed. Isabel wants to say red. Did any of you not notice that I switched the color of shirt that I was wearing? Olivia's saying, oh my God, wait. No, Olivia didn't notice.
Some of us don't even realize what color shirt other people are wearing. I was like, wait, he wasn't wearing that before.
Nice. I had to trigger you. I had to prime you. Isabel, not until right now. Leah, I did notice, but I didn't want to say anything. Yeah, I mean, it's not like I spilled something on my shirt. I did this on purpose. This is the color shirt I was wearing at the start of class. I changed my shirt, y'all. Look at how many of y'all didn't notice. Facundo didn't notice. Olivia didn't notice. Isabel didn't notice. And now you remember now, Olivia, right? Yeah. I tried to wear like my brightest, boldest shirt at the start, the most memorable of shirts that I could wear. But it doesn't really register as an event to most of us. So why would we notice if somebody changed shirts? Facundo is saying, every step of this class, I'd be like, man, that stuff will be so noticeable. And every time I keep getting proven wrong. I mean, that's the whole point of this class, that these biases largely are what people refer to as implicit. A cognitive bias is often hidden. That's one of the creepiest things about cognitive biases. Many of our cognitive biases are implicit. And by implicit, that means we're not aware of them, even though we have them. So Facundo, your mind is essentially deceiving you about how often your mind deceives you. That's some like second order nastiness. And it's not just your mind, Facundo, it's all of our minds. The sort of natural story our mind tells us is that we got this, we understand what's going on, we see the world around us. But the reality is we're just picking up little pieces of the world around us, not even close to the whole picture of what's going on around us. There's a whole podcast called the Hidden Brain Podcast that focuses on implicit cognitiveness, the aspects of our brain that are implicit to us, hidden to us. We don't realize how our brain's working to try to give us the answers that they do. Maybe I'll put that right here. All right, creepy, creepy, creepy. Sorry to creep y'all out. Let's see what I can do now. I'm going to switch over to a slideshow. Let's see. Where's my slideshow? Where's my slideshow? Not memory. Where is it? There it is, confirmation bias. So one of the biggest biases we have is called confirmation bias. That'll be the first one we're going to discuss in greater detail. Before we do that though, Facundo's written something cool in the chat. Facundo writes, I can't imagine what type of biases even the people highest in power are influenced by without noticing. Well, fortunately, that's what we'll be talking about throughout the rest of class today. So, good thing you've got a chance throughout the rest of the weeks to dive into this actual question. Hopefully, by the end of these few weeks, you'll be able to say, I now can imagine what types of bias people high in power are influenced by without noticing. So confirmation bias is one of the biggest ones. And this is another classic trade-off thing where on the one hand, this is a great heuristic that our fast brain, our fast mental processing uses to be efficient. But on the other hand, it can lead to so many errors in the wrong brain. So let's talk a little bit about what confirmation bias is. Confirmation bias is this tendency that all humans have. Me, you, all of us. Again, it's not just you, it's me as well. Somebody who teaches this for a living, somebody whose job it is to look into these biases. It's this tendency for us to uncritically accept new information that confirms what we already believe. We're just really uncritical about it. And this is in contrast to the flip side of confirmation bias, which is disconfirmation bias. On the disconfirmation side of things, we wind up being totally critical and extending a huge amount of scrutiny towards new info that goes against what we already believe. So this is the classic asymmetry. When we're faced with new evidence that goes with what we already believe, we're uncritical. When we're faced with evidence that tries to disprove what we already believe, that's where we get critical. That's where we look for reasons to reject it. This asymmetry from a logical perspective is a problem. It's a bad idea in general to be uncritical, especially in a class called critical thinking. But in the context of just reasoning in general, we want to apply the same standards of scrutiny towards any new evidence that we find. So I'm going to do a really tortured metaphor to describe this right now. Let's say we think of our mind as like, I don't know, like a building where there's like a parking lot, where there's a security guard outside of the parking lot that only lets in the appropriate people into that parking lot. Well, that's how you can think of our brains. My mind has this sort of protector in front of it. And that protector is trying to protect all my current beliefs. Every single green dot on that brain represents specific beliefs I currently hold. And I have a mental security guard who I'm going to refer to as Lazy Connie, who is looking at any new belief to figure out whether she's okay with letting that new belief into my mind or whether she wants to stop that belief from getting into my mind. I refer to her as Lazy Connie because Connie in this context is short for confirmation bias. So here's how Lazy Connie our confirmation bias system works. Let's say we were given some new info. And since our mind is already full of a bunch of green dots, and this new info is green, it's familiar, it looks like what I've already accepted into my mind, Lazy Connie barely checks this belief, just totally lets it in. Just like if you ever have to go to a place where you do that, like a pat down to make sure you're okay. This is one of the worst security guards doing the laziest job there is towards this. That's what Lazy Connie does with new beliefs that totally match what we already believe, that's consistent with, that confirms, that's not challenging to us in any way. Lazy Connie's just lazy about it, lets it in. Lets it in super easily. Now, on the other hand, look what happens when there's new info that goes against what we believe. Some weird new info that is unlike anything I've already let into my mind. This red dot is disconfirming what I already believe. Here's where Lazy Connie turns into a hardcore security. Lazy Connie is totally mean towards that new evidence, is absolutely critical, is trying to search any and all parts of that. I'll stop that GIF because it's disturbing. Even though it's just a computer simulation, it's not anything real. But Lazy Connie is looking for reasons to reject that new info. And you might think that like, oh, Lazy Connie's not being lazy in that circumstance, but she still is. Because if Lazy Connie has to let in this new info that goes against what she already believes, then Lazy Connie's going to have to do a sweep of my entire mind and start kicking out old beliefs that she already let in. And so, for the sake of laziness, because Connie doesn't want to be challenged in that way, because honestly, it's not Connie, it's me, I don't want to be challenged in that way, I'd rather not change my mind. I'd rather look for reasons to dismiss whatever this new info is that would make it such that I should change my mind. So this system is only reliable if I have true beliefs in it already. If I've filled my mind with already true beliefs, then new beliefs that sort of match those true beliefs will be let in easily. And new beliefs that don't match those beliefs, that are more likely to be false, will be rejected. This is a decent heuristic, provided that your mind is already full of the truth. But what if your mind is full of false beliefs? It doesn't even have to be completely full. But you notice how I changed the dots here? Rather than being green dots, they're now red dots. If I've already let in a bunch of false beliefs, then I'm going to be way more likely to uncritically accept new false information. And now I wind up rejecting true beliefs because I'm looking for any and all reasons to do some stuff that goes against what I already believe. This is what happens with people who fall for conspiracy theories. Individuals who start with one or two reasons to think that a conspiracy theory might be plausible, like 9/11 was an inside job, or the earth is flat, not round. Once they start letting in those false beliefs, the confirmation bias starts to kick in. They're more likely to let in even more false beliefs that confirm that the earth is flat. And they're more likely to look for any and all reasons to reject evidence that the earth is round. What do you mean there are photographs from space? That's just what the government's trying to tell you. Somebody made that on a computer. That's not a real photograph. What do you mean some flights actually fly across the South Pole? That's just the whole FAA trying to trick you and deceive you into thinking that flights actually do that. That's disconfirmation bias at its highest level. So this is one of the big things that I want us to be on the lookout for. It's not that being critical is bad. It's not that applying scrutiny is bad. It's this asymmetric scrutiny where we only are critical of some beliefs. We have this motive to disconfirm those beliefs. And we're super uncritical towards beliefs we already agree with that could lead to these sorts of problems. Questions, thoughts, concerns about anything related to this? Anyone have examples of confirmation bias or disconfirmation bias in your own life? Instances where maybe it's happened to you personally, or instances where you noticed it in someone else, a friend, a family member, someone you know? One of the things I'm going to be asking us to do a lot is to try to examine our own lives as much as possible, to look for instances of each and every one of these biases. Ideally, you can be self-critical enough to notice these sorts of biases in yourself. Notice them when they happen to you. But that can be really hard, particularly since we mentioned already that these cognitive biases are often implicit. They're hidden to us. They're biases we have, but we don't realize that we have. So maybe you can try to think of examples of these things happening to other people. What examples can you think of where you or someone you know seem to be under the sway of confirmation bias, seem to be exhibiting disconfirmation bias in some way? An instance where somebody refused to accept some seemingly obvious new info just because it went against what they already believed. Have you ever been with somebody who's been stubborn like that? Where you've just sort of led them to the truth, but they refuse to accept it because of disconfirmation bias? Facundo, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually have one example of a friend of mine who was trying to tell me about how the earth was flat, and he used this one video about basically like water going down a funnel at the equator of the earth. And he was trying to show, I forgot his exact argument, but he was trying to pinpoint how like once they put it on this side of the equator, then it would spin a certain way, and then when they put it on the other side of the equator, it would spin a certain way, and then that's why the earth was flat. So I took their video, and then I like did a little bit more digging, and I figured out that the effect in the video is called the Coriolis effect. And basically that effect is caused because the earth is round and our cyclic systems work differently on both sides of the equator. So what he was trying to prove was the earth was flat using some type of effect that was used because it was round. And I was kind of telling him how he kind of misunderstood it the wrong way, and he just completely ignored what I said, and like he ignored his own point basically, and was like, nah, it's not, the earth is flat. And I was like, okay, I used your own words against you, proved what you were actually using, and you still don't believe it. And I was just like, okay, moving on.
It's a really good example. I love Olivia's sort of summary here. Some people just don't want to be wrong. This is confirmation bias in a simple sentence. Confirmation bias and disconfirmation bias is that stubbornness, wanting to just not change your mind, not admit that you made a mistake, that you're wrong and others might be right, and changing your mind might make sense. But Facundo's actual example, I love this. This is a variation, a sophisticated, tricky variation of confirmation bias. One way that you can exhibit confirmation bias is you take evidence that seems to disprove your position and interpret it as if it actually is evidence for your position. You just interpret all evidence in the world as if it's further support for your position. So your actual example, I love this. I think a classic thing many of us know is that like toilets flush in the opposite direction in the South Pole. So if you go to like Chile or Argentina or Australia or lots of the southern countries in Africa, like South Africa, the toilets will just flush and they'll spin in the opposite direction. Really weird, really interesting. The classic explanation for this has to do with the polarity of the Earth and the fact that there are these different forces in different directions, whether you're in the southern hemisphere of a round planet or the northern hemisphere of a round rotating planet, a round revolving planet. Absolutely, the sphericality of the Earth is central to that explanation. And yet, flat earthers will take that same evidence that the water spins in different directions in the different hemispheres, as evidence that confirms what they already believe, rather than as evidence that's going against what they believe. This is classic confirmation bias at work. I think sports fans are particularly good, not good in a positive way, but particularly prone to confirmation bias and disconfirmation bias. Talk to any fan of a professional sports team about their chances of winning it all this year, and they'll just interpret everything in some sort of positive way for their team, saying like, yeah, I know we've lost the last 4 games. I know that we have all these injuries to our star players, but have no fear. I know they're going to win it all at the end anyway. The backups are better. They got their losses behind them. Now they can focus on just winning from here on out. Better to lose now than lose in the playoffs. That's just confirmation bias at work. Isabel's got a nice example of people who don't agree with wearing masks. Some of them might have legitimate evidence in support of them, but a lot of them might be falling victim to disconfirmation bias. A lot of them might be only accepting information that confirms that masks are bad, right? Maybe a lot of their friends and family are sharing on Facebook, are sharing with them articles that talk about the dangers of wearing masks, or why it's silly to wear masks, or why it's a violation of freedom to wear masks, or argument of choice in these times of COVID-19. And any sort of other evidence that's put forward that masks are helpful, that masks are the sort of thing that can help spread, that can help minimize the spread of COVID-19, is met with critical scrutiny. Like, oh, what scientists are you talking about? Are they actually secretly Democrats? Is there some bias that they have that we can dismiss what those scientists are telling us? That's classic disconfirmation bias. All right, so now what I want to do is switch to talk a little bit about memory. We've talked a little bit about direct experience, what cognitive biases are in general. We've set the stage by discussing fast mental processing, contrasting it with slow mental processing. We've done a nice deep dive into confirmation bias. Now it's one more chance for us to switch over to discussing memory. Here we go. Make this a little bit bigger so you can see it all big like. There we go. Great. So, a bunch of you did one of the 2 extra credits from last week. That's really cool. The extra credit on memory. I asked you all to give me an example of a memorable event from your past, like the time you broke a bone in your body, or a major birthday or something like that. And I first just want to comment that I appreciate the amount of honesty that many of you put forward in describing some unpleasant, memorable events in your past. Many of you were particularly honest and forthcoming with some harrowing negative incidents that happened. So I appreciate how radically honest many of you were in describing a memorable event. So the tenor of lots of your events weren't like happy, big, positive incidences. But the sort of thing that I want to pull from this is more of just our general understanding of how memory works. So I wanted to pull a few key quotes from each of you when you filled in the blank for both of these sentences. For when an experience first becomes a memory, I wanted you to fill in the blank for this sentence. When I experience an event, here's how that event becomes a memory in my mind. And then later, when I want to recall that experience as a memory, here's what goes on in my mind. So for this first bit, when I experience an event, I blank. Here are some of the things that you wrote in the discussion board extra credits. So you said you wind up creating mental pictures for your memories. Others of you said that you take in all the little details. One of you said you take in actually what's happening as it's happening. Some of you says that winds up becoming engraved in your mind, like somebody's carving and engraving in your mind. Some of you says it becomes a memory immediately as soon as you experience it. Some of you said that you keep telling yourself how amazing the experience is. So this whole account, all of these quotes, suggest a particular narrative of how memories work. This is the narrative that we record events when we experience them, and we store them in the back of our mind. So we first record the event, and we record its details, kind of like a video would record things when you're just taking a video using your phone. And then you store it in your mind for later, just like you would store a video on your phone for later, to watch later if you wanted. This metaphor was pretty popular, pretty common. Lots of you seem to suggest that this way makes sense. All right, so the second part of this was trying to recall the experience later as a memory. Here are some of the things that you wrote for filling in that. When I want to remember the event later, what happens is that those memories are locked in my brain somewhere. They're somewhere locked deep down in the recesses of my brain. I have to think about the event again, and then maybe I talk to my friends about it, maybe I bring someone with me to reminisce, something like that. But those memories just pop up in my head after I've thought about it for a bit, after I've talked about it a bit. And all the memory just sticks out somewhere in my mind, and it all comes flooding back. I can suddenly remember it again. It requires some effort maybe to think back, but it all comes flooding back, particularly maybe the emotions, feelings associated with it, but also like all those details that you recorded that first time. So this is the search and replay metaphor to what's going on here. What happens when you're trying to remember a memory is that you search for the memory somewhere in the back of your mind. It takes some effort, but you eventually find that memory in your mind. It was stored somewhere, and then you just replay it, right? Kind of like you would replay a video, right? This is exactly how you would do this on your phone as well, right? You would just like have an old video, be like, oh, you know what? I actually took a video of the day that happened. Let me try to find that video. And then you sort of scroll through, and you're like, oh, here it is. And then you replay it. Like, this is what was happening at that day, on that day, something like that. So this is a popular metaphor for how memories work. It's the file cabinet metaphor. When you experience an event, you record the event and its details, store it in your mind for later. When you want to remember that event later, you search for the memory that's stored somewhere in the back of your mind. You find the memory in that memory storage, and you replay it. There's the analogy written out by, I don't know, Thomson Higher Education. I just pulled it off of the web. It's a filing cabinet memory. You have instant sensory inputs, all your sensory experiences, that turn into short-term memory. And then you only store some of your short-term memories as long-term memories. And then they just get stored in the back. And they're there for you to replay later as you need. Yeah, so Shante, this was the extra credit DQ that I'm talking about. Everything that I was just pulling were actual quotes from your DQs, from some of your DQs. Some of you might recognize your actual quotes here. I'm not sure. The movie Inside Out, I think, does a nice job of visually representing this. I'm not sure how many of you have seen Inside Out or are fans of it, but it's the story of, I think, like a 10-year-old girl and her inner mental life, who are represented by particular characters that represent emotions. Like joy is one emotion, sadness is another emotion, anger is a third emotion. It's a very cool movie. Nice. Corey likes it. Najwa really likes it. Shantae was actually thinking about that when answering the extra credit discussion question. Very cool. It's aight. Shanae's not going to give it too much praise. That's fine. I liked it. I thought it was cool. But this, all those shining balls that are on all of those different like shelves behind those two characters are memories in the back of our main character's mind, our 10-year-old girl's mind. All of those are memories. And then what you do is you can take a memory if you want to actually remember the event, and you can replay it. Just like you would take, this is like old school, but like you would take a DVD and you would put it into the DVD player, and then it would play the DVD. You would have that same sort of way to show what's going on here. So that's the file cabinet metaphor. Very nicely illustrated in the movie Inside Out. There's only one problem with this story of how memory works. Does anyone know what might be wrong with this story? Because this really feels pretty plausible, right? This is like the story of how memory works. I feel like lots of us buy. Does anyone see any issue with this? Anyone see any small, minor issue? Stumper, right? We will be getting to it. There are more slides on this slide show. What do you think? Or do you mostly just buy this? Does this mostly make sense? So Corey's saying too many memories to recall all the time. Shanae mostly buys this. Shanae does this. Isabel says, what if you can't find it? Yeah, that is a frustrating experience, right? Have you ever tried to remember what you did on a certain birthday? And you're like, what did I do? What did I do on my 11th birthday? And you're like, what was it? What was it? What was it? Right? Just to remind yourself to go back to what we had here, that's when you're searching, right? You're searching for the memory, and it could take some time. Maybe you have to talk to your friends about it or bring someone else to reminisce with you. So maybe you talk to one of your parents. You're like, wait, what did I do when I was 11? And then you have to talk to them. And then eventually they like jog your memory a little bit. You're like, oh yeah, that's it. And it all comes flooding back, right? That's how this metaphor is supposed to work anyway. And Shanae says that's why you have pictures, right? You can literally scroll through your phone these days. It's hard to even remember the time before all of us having cameras on our phones, having cameras with us all the time, for us to just be able to look back and have these visual cues to help us. Shantae says, sometimes I can't remember, so it's harder to recall memories. Yeah, so the file cabinet memory could be like, we store the memories in the back of our mind, and like sometimes, not only is it hard to like find those old memories because our like cabinet is kind of long and big and it's hard to remember. Sometimes even when we replay the memories, like the memories faded a little bit, right? We hit play again and it's like, wait, I'm sort of trying to remember exactly what happened, right? As Corey says, they get lost or misplaced in the back of your mind, which can happen, right? Further to Isabel's point. But even when you do like reach the actual memory itself, sometimes when you replay it, like it's kind of faded, right? It's like, wait, ooh, there's like a bit missing in the middle, or somebody needs to jog your memory or something like that. So yeah, I like these sorts of concerns about this file cabinet metaphor. So they're not exactly the problem that I had in mind, but I like them. The only problem I have with this account of how memories work is all of it. This entire account of how memory works is completely mistaken. Every single line of what I just wrote is the wrong story of how memories work. Do you hear me getting real animated about this? This whole account is a lie. This is the lie, weirdly, that our minds tell us about how our memory works. Our memories feel like they work this way, but in reality, memories don't work this way at all. The actual psychological research for memory psychologists, people who study this, say memory works nothing like this. You feeling weird about this? You feeling puzzled? Let's try to get to the actual way that memories work and contrast this with the rest of you. So, you record the event and its details as some of the first bit of this. That is not true at all. We've already just got done saying how much we don't notice the details. How many of you didn't notice that the color of my shirt changed? How many of you didn't notice all the changes in that video? You're not noticing the details, even when you're directly experiencing things. So you can't even remember that when you're not noticing them in the first place. Corey's saying we're unconsciously taking in the details. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that you can then unconsciously recall those details later. I don't know if you've ever tried to do this, but like every once in a while, just like close your eyes and try to just like describe what you see room around you. Not a room you're super duper familiar with, like your bedroom that you've been in like hundreds of times in your life, but like just go to a regular classroom and then just close your eyes and try to describe what's where in that classroom around you. That's super hard to do. You might be like, well, I think there was like a podium in the front of the room. I forget which side of the room it was on. Maybe there was like a fire extinguisher in the back of the room. Maybe not, I forget. Was there like a pencil sharpener in the one corner? I don't remember. How many windows were in the room? Where were they? How big were they? How many rows of chairs and desks were there in the room? It's really hard to do that because you're not really taking in those details in a way that's nice and neat and organized. You're just not doing that. We just went through that right here. You're not picking up those details. So you'll hear this all the time. I love talking to people like a couple to just sort of hear their experience describing a first date. And to hear the couples who've like been married for years describe a first date, it's almost like they're describing two radically different events. They have different memories of those events because they've like filled in different details about what's going on. So you'll hear a couple where like one of them says like, no, I remember I was wearing like my favorite blue shirt at the time. So I must have been wearing that blue shirt. It was my favorite shirt when we started dating. And then the other's like, no, I remember it was so striking that you were wearing that really cool purple shirt, that awesome shirt that I feel like I even commented on it, how cool it was at the time. And they'll be completely in disagreement about whether the one wore the blue shirt or the purple shirt for that first date. All right, so that's definitely wrong. We don't record the event. We certainly don't record them as experiences. What we actually wind up, quote unquote, storing in our mind is not an entire like video recording of the event. Our brains are just too lazy to do this, right? Our brains are far more efficient than this. Instead, what our brains store is a story, a narrative, a literal just like once upon a time, this thing happened first. And then a second thing happened as a result of the first thing. And then a third thing happened as a result of the second thing. And in the end, this is how it all ended. That's what gets stored in our mind. A literal, oversimplified, perhaps highly exaggerated, structural narrative. So when I say oversimplified, we might often just reframe all events in our life as the story of good versus evil. So maybe you have a story of going on a date with somebody and the waiter was kind of odd with you at the date. So now the story in your mind is the story of two lovely, innocent people on a date versus this evil server, this evil waiter. Now it's a good versus evil story. And you wind up exaggerating the events. So this is why people's memory often get exaggerated. The classic instance of this is somebody going fishing who says like, I caught a fish. But when I wasn't able to fully catch it, but I almost caught a fish that was this big. And the more they tell it, the more it becomes this big. And then it's this big, even bigger. Then it was this big. We just exaggerate these things. So the more you start telling that story of the time you had a weird waiter on that date, the more you exaggerate what happened. At the start of it, you're like, yeah, the waiter was weird because they kept giving us kind of like weird looks. And like when they brought our food out, they weren't smiling. And then at events, eventually it turns into our waiter was horrible. The waiter kept scowling at us. When the waiter brought our food to us, the waiter just like dropped the plates on our table and just walked away in a huff. We start exaggerating this in this way. And they all follow the same basic structure, right? A story has a beginning, middle, and an end. A story follows the same basic narrative. When we start with a story, it's the world was normal, and then inciting incident. This weird thing happened that changed the normality, and it led to all this weird thing, and it led to a conflict in me. I had to make a choice. I, as the hero, had to make a choice. And I finally made that choice, and that choice led to a change. It wound up returning to normalcy. But at the end of all of that, I too had changed because I didn't want to make that choice at first. I wanted things to be back where they were. But now that things were back for where they were, I kind of realized that that normal way from first isn't what I want it to be. That's pretty much every story. And all your memories, whether you like it or not, fit that sort of creepy story that we're just prone to fitting everything into. Shantae has a really good question in the chat here. Isn't this why witness statements, eyewitness statements, aren't good sources of events? Because they start making things up as they recall what happened. Yeah, eyewitness testimony is one of the strongest issues in criminal justice these days. When I think of some of the top things that lead convictions in criminal cases, we've got three basic things. First thing that leads to convictions is DNA evidence at the scene of a crime. Second thing that leads to convictions in court cases is eyewitness testimony. Somebody who says, I was there, I saw the criminal committing the criminal act, I can identify the criminal as the defendant. That eyewitness testimony is another big thing that leads to convictions. The third thing that leads to convictions is confessions. If the person on trial confessed to committing the crime, they're far more likely to get a conviction. Those second and third things are way less reliable than we think. And this whole lesson we're dealing with right now about how memories work is in part trying to get you to realize how unreliable memory actually is. Eyewitnesses can be themselves completely confident that they saw what they think they saw. But in fact, their memory is not nearly as reliable as they think, and they might not really be reliably remembering what they think they saw. So oftentimes, organizations like the Innocence Project, whose entire mission is to look at old cases of people who are maybe on death row or maybe getting super long sentences, where the evidence that convicted them might be kind of shaky. They look back and try to get these repeals of old cases. And by trying to get DNA evidence in cases where DNA evidence wasn't used, they wind up getting overturned rulings so many times, maybe 70 to 80% of the times, in cases where the main factor of a conviction was an eyewitness testimony. Eyewitness testimony that was itself inaccurate. Eyewitness testimony that was off. There's a somewhat unsettling example of this from that's a resource that you can check out this week if you want. I'm going to pull this up again so you see it. In Unit 11, there's a video titled Eyewitness Identification, a video by this Innocence Project I was just mentioning. There's a little bit of a content warning on this because it's the specific incident that they're describing is an incident of sexual assault where an eyewitness was trying to identify the correct suspect, but identified the wrong suspect in this particular case. I recommend watching that video if you're interested in what Shantae was talking about the reliability of eyewitness testimony. All right, so you see how we crossed out every single part. First thing, how experiences become memories, not the way we think. The actual story is this. Each one of us stores a simple narrative of what we think happened in our mind. That's what goes on. What gets stored is a little story, a quick little beginning, middle, end story of what we think happened. Now, let's go to the second part. This is also wrong, remember. Let's talk about how each part of this is wrong. When you search for the memory, you're not searching for the memory because the memories themselves aren't stored. You're searching for the narrative, right? So you search for that story. And maybe you find the story, but you don't replay the story. The story isn't stored the way like a video is stored in your mind. It's just a story. It's just literally some ideas in your mind with a beginning, middle, and end. It's not replaying a recording. You actually literally retell the story. And as you're retelling the story as your memory, your mind recreates the details. I'm using the word recreate purposefully here, like a dramatic recreation. You ever watch those cheesy TV shows like Unsolved Mysteries just come back on Netflix? I don't know if you've watched those Unsolved Mysteries. They have actors who are portraying incidents, real people that have experienced real incidents. That's what your mind is doing. Your mind is literally recreating the event, creating a little mini fiction inside of your mind. And that's what's going on. And this is the correct account here. You search for the story, recreate it, filling in details based on what you infer or assume happened, what you're inferring right now. So you hear the story I just mentioned about a couple who's been married for years describing their first date, where one looks back and says, I'm sure I was wearing my blue shirt because my blue shirt was my favorite shirt at the time. So on a first date, I would have worn my favorite blue shirt. That's just an inference, right? That's somebody who's saying, what was my favorite shirt at the time? I probably would have worn my favorite shirt at the time. That's somebody inferring the details, not somebody who just has a visual, like video memory of what actually happened on the date. So much of our memory is based off of this type of inference. And our mind doesn't know the difference between a photographic memory of the happening and us filling in the details. Our mind doesn't make that distinction. And by the way, every time you recall the same memory, you don't recall the first time. You wind up recalling the last time you remembered the story, the last time you told the story. You reenact only the last time you told it. So every memory you have is a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And this leads to our own internal whisper down the lane effects. Remember when we talked about whisper down the lane effects for hearsay? It's the same thing, where one person tells another person, that second person tells a third person, that third person tells a fourth person, that whatever's getting told might wind up getting distorted and changed from person to person in retelling. The same thing happens to yourself with your own memory. The more you tell the same memory, the more you remember the same memory, the more likely it is to get distorted, exaggerated, oversimplified in some sort of way. Very creepy, right? This is the more accurate account of how memory works. And by the way, the implication of this last sentence here, the next time you recall the memory, you recall the last time you remember the story and reenact it, suggests a very creepy implication. The things we remember most often, the things we keep thinking about over and over and over again, are actually weirdly, paradoxically, most likely to be distorted memories because we've thought about them over and over and over and over and over again. So there are all these fantastic, amazing psychological studies of these flashbulb memories, memories of really big events. Thank you for saying it's trippy, Corey. I agree with you. Like, where were you on 9/11? Or where were you when this big thing happened? Where psychologists will ask people to write down the day after a major event, just write down what you were doing the day that it happened. And then 6 months later, write down what you think happened 6 months ago at that major event, like 9/11. And a year later, write down what you think happened. 5 years later, write down what you think happened. And amazingly, so many people's story of what they were doing, of what happened at the time, changes 6 months out, a year out, 5 years out. That's all people would talk about 9/11 in those 5 to 10 years afterwards. Where were you when 9/11 happened? What first happened? What did you first remember? For many of you, it might be a flashbulb memory. For us, might be the day you found out that Trump lost the 2020 election and Biden actually won. That might be a flashbulb memory for you. And right now, we're only 5 days out from that, right? That happened on Saturday, right? That might have been a major event in your life that many people talk about. Like, where were you when that happened? What did you do? How did you react? So right now, you have the strongest memory, the most reliable memory of what happened. But a year from now, it might be totally different. Your memory of what happened. 5 years from now might be totally different. You might remember being with different people. You might remember experiencing it in a very different way. So what I recommend doing is actually write down a little story, write down a little narrative of what you think happened when you found out that Trump lost and Biden won this most recent election. And then revisit it in 2025, revisit it in 2030, and see if your memory of what happened matches what you wrote down or doesn't match at all what you wrote down. You'll be surprised at the difference. By the way, I do want to give some heads up to some people. Some of you did get this right in your answers. So in particular, people who said, I keep telling myself how amazing this experience is over and over and over again. That is one way that memory works, right? It's about just continuing to tell yourself over and over and over again. Some of you, when recalling the experience later, explicitly said, like, talking to people is what you do because you are talking to people who are helping you infer what happened. Some of you even explicitly mentioned the fact that when you remember an event multiple times, you just remember your remembering of the event. I think Isabel mentioned this explicitly in her extra credit. And some of you mentioned the notorious unreliability of memory. But in general, this correct account doesn't feel nearly as correct as we think it does. It goes in contrast to how our mind wants us to think our memory works. Our mind wants us to think it's as reliable as a filing cabinet. It's reliable as the videos you store on your phone. It's not nearly as reliable as all that. Weird, creepy, weird, funky. All right. I want to remind you all of what you have due for class today. Not today, but this week. It's just that simple discussion board. Where is it? Unit 11. All you have to do is make up a random sequence of 20 coin flips and then actually flip a coin 20 times, record the results, and then write both of those sequences down in this particular discussion board. That's all you got to do. It's due Wednesday. Very simple, very easy. I will be looking in there and I will be writing what I think you did, whether it came from your mind or whether it came from actual coin flips. It's all you got to do. It's due Wednesday. Nothing more, nothing less. And I'll end with one final question. What color shirt was I wearing at the middle of class today? I know we all remember that I was wearing a red shirt at the beginning of class. What color shirt was I wearing in the middle of class? Shanae says it's the one I have on now. You don't think I've changed? Was it this one? Anaya's saying I didn't change. Shanae's saying I didn't change. How confident are you? Anaya's like, I don't know. Am I freaking you out right now? Frank is saying, I guess no. There's a similar pattern, but now it's a little bit lighter, Facundo. Corey's saying, I have no idea. All right, let me show you what other shirt I was wearing at the middle of class. No, it was this one. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to freak you out. Shanae was right. Good job, y'all. Not trying to freak or get you trippy. But I had you, didn't I? Y'all were feeling like, well, maybe he did change shirts again. Maybe he did, right? Shanae was on it, though. Good job, Shanae. Good job also, Anaya, even though I got her to feel a little bit like, oh, maybe not, maybe not. All right, anyway, I'm done this. I won't change shirts on you again. Corey, I appreciate it. Don't have confidence that you can remember anything accurately anymore. If there's any lesson you can take from today, it's that our memory is weird and not that reliable. Have a good weekend, y'all. I appreciate you putting up with my shenanigans. Enjoy your week.